Hello Penguinauts, I'm the Beardy Penguin and welcome to a brand new Kerbal Space Program Space Warfare series with Tape Gaming, Kerbal Rising, and welcome to Dreidos. It may not be much, but it's home. A barren wasteland, but a barren wasteland now with a breathable atmosphere thanks to about 1,000 years of terraforming. Yes, it has been 1,000 years since we fled Kerbin, fled the nuclear hellfire that it fell to. But our civilization has grown strong amongst the harsh environment of Dreidos, and now the supreme leader of the Dreidos Imperium has decreed that we shall once more venture into the stars and we will reconquer the solar system. Kerbal kind will be reunited once more. However, the scattered remnants of the Kerbal race probably aren't going to be much of a fan of uniting with us, so we're probably going to need to use some force. However, in order to do this, we commissioned the construction of a vast interplanetary carrier known as the ISS Spirit of Dreidos, which we're flying to now. However, the resources required to build such a craft were very extensive, meaning that in order to meet the schedule we needed to place a lot of pressure on the mining installation on our nearby moon of Dreidos. The workers, for some reason, weren't particularly happy with 80-hour weeks with no pay, and as such, the riots that ensued strengthened the already pretty powerful resistance and independence movement, and as such they've overwhelmed the small security garrison, seized their weapons, and taken control of our moon and its mining installation, which is vital to the Dreidos war machine. So the Supreme Leader has dispatched this spacecraft, a Mercury-class dropship, up to the Spirit of Dreidos, and we're carrying 3 Haley-class assault rovers, and we're going to travel up to Dreidos. We're going to essentially deploy the rovers and obliterate them. There will be no negotiation. They dared to defy the Supreme Leader's wishes, and they will pay the consequences. If you're wondering, the Mercury-class dropship is powered by 2 thermal ramjets. Essentially, the way that works is it has almost infinite fuel inside the atmosphere. It has 2 antimatter-initiated fusion reactors, and it passes the atmosphere through those, vaporizing it, heating up to a few million degrees, and then passing it out the back, producing quite a fair amount of thrust. Yes, the technology level in this series is very advanced. The technology level is about the same level as the TV show The Expanse, and well, the books as well, of course, which I have myself started reading. If you haven't watched the show, don't worry, it's not connected to it. That's just roughly what sort of technology level we're going for. So no warp drives, just very sophisticated fusion drives and the like. And there it is, the ISS Spirit of Dreidos. It's a testament to just how massive this ship is. But even at our 25-kilometer load range, you can still see it absolutely clearly. We're now closing for a docking maneuver. It's designed around, I should say that the Mercury class is designed for the carrier, but no, the carrier was actually designed around the Mercury class dropship. So that main central hangar bay, that's designed for the Mercury class, so we're just going to dock in there. It is a bit of a snug fit, so this is a very careful, very, very slow docking maneuver, and it does take some time, so we're just going to skip through it until we actually finally dock with the ISS Spirit of Dreidos. Now, as much as I would like to fly straight up and restore order to our colony on Dreidos, the revolutionaries have managed to commandeer a spacecraft. Now, just a small corvette named the Razorback class, but it has got some sophisticated weapon systems on board it, and the ISS Spirit of Dreidos is completely undefended. So we are going to have to send a small task force to go deal with their orbital defences before we can send the Mercury-class dropship there to deploy our ground forces and destroy them. The first of this task force is a Pluto-class corvette. It's a short-range escort vessel. We haven't got anything better to hand. It only has 2 30mm cannons, but it's got some light armour and it's quite decent in a fight. The bad news is this Ceres class skiff. It's a repurposed ice hauler just designed to make short runs between the rings of Dreidos and the Dreidos shipyard, which you can see us leaving here. However, it has got a small mining laser which will double up as a decent anti-ship weapon, so we're going to take it along with us. Our navy is still very small, but once we start expanding across the solar system, we'll start gaining more and more resources as we establish colonies on more and more worlds, and our navy can start getting more sophisticated, with much larger vessels like frigates and destroyers and dreadnoughts with massive keel-mounted railguns. At the moment, those are just dreams of our design bureau, and we're having to make do with tiny corvettes with about 150mm of armour all round and a simple fusion torch driving it. The ISS Spirit of Dreidos has got 4 massive interplanetary Kerbstein drives, but Kerbstein drives produce such a ridiculous amount of neutron radiation that using them inside a gravity well would make it uninhabitable within a couple of months. So we're not using Kerbstein drives within gravity wells, they're only for interplanetary travel. Anyway, our small little task force consisting of our Ceres class and our Pluto class, as you can see the radiators heating up there from the use of the fusion engines, and a beautiful shot of them skimming over the rings there. They are now heading out towards Dreidos to deal with the single corvette that is waiting for them in orbit. With regards to how we managed to get Beardy Armory to work in space, Beardy Armory uses the surface of the planet you're currently orbiting as a reference point to aim the weapons. So if you're travelling at 8 kilometers per second over it, things get a little bit dodgy. So what you need to do to have space combat is either have it over a low gravity world where your orbital velocity is very low, or what you can do is go into around geostationary orbit around larger bodies. So space combat around Kerbin-like worlds, you need to go near geostationary orbit in order for your guns to actually aim correctly. I've seen many comments along the lines of, oh, it probably wouldn't take too many lines of code changing in order to make Beardy Armory work in space. No, you are wrong, trust me. If it was easy, the BD devs would have done it, and trust me, those are some very talented people. If they could make it work easily in space, they would have. And Beardy Armory's focus isn't on space, it is on atmospheric combat and the like. Trust me, it's a lot more complicated than you might think at first. Anyway, we've got our orbit around Dreidos, and now we have our intersect with the Razorback class corvette. The sun passes behind the small moon as we begin to make our approach. We need to line ourselves up. We have a very slow intercept velocity because this is only a small moon. It's only slightly larger than Gilly, I believe. Pretty good for mining, it's got a lot of useful resources, but it's, yeah, not particularly substantial. So the sun has just risen, and now we are beginning to make our approach. As I said, the Pluto class corvette's got 2 30mm turrets on it, and the Ceres class has got a anti-ship laser on board. The anti-ship laser is pretty weak at long range, but once you get within close range, it can really start carving up on our armored targets once you get below 4 to 5 kilometers. There's the Razorback. Yeah, they're not looking particularly friendly. However, we have got an advantage here because they're using 2 of those 30mm goalkeeper cannons, and you might think, whoa, those are amazing, massive, powerful cannons, and you'd be right. But in space, you need a scalpel to shoot enemy ships, not a bludgeon. The 30mm goalkeeper is less of a bludgeon, more of a battering ram. It can spew out thousands of rounds a minute, but spewing out thousands of rounds a minute is pretty pointless in space if you're spewing them in the wrong direction. It's hopelessly inaccurate and not particularly long range. In space, as you can see, lasers are much more effective. Now at this range, as you see, we're doing barely any damage to it, but they're starting to return fire, and as you can see, their shots are going just wildly off course. We're taking evasive maneuvers, just a standard operating procedure, as that Ceres class, it doesn't have any armor, so it only has to take 1 hit and it will be cut in half by those 30mm. But it just can't hit us. The spray of fire is just ridiculous, and the recoil on a small spacecraft like that is pretty ridiculous. We have some much weaker 30mm, but they're also much more accurate. As you see, the rate of fire is significantly lower, and the muzzle velocity is also a little lower. But as you can see, they're so much more accurate. We're getting a lot of very consistent hits on the Razorback, and it's starting to take some pretty serious damage. I try to get it to change its armament up, use the chain gun, but while we're changing it, gets hit by a volley of 30mm fire from the Pluto class, and it gets completely obliterated. Scratch 1 for the Dreidos Navy. Beautiful. We just adjust our course so that we can fly through the debris. Standard operating procedure. You got to fly through the debris after you destroy an enemy spacecraft. It looks so cool. As you see, there we go. Just adjusting course, wasting a bit of fuel, but hey, style points before saving fuel, and it's only liquid hydrogen that we're using anyway. These are pretty damn efficient engines. They use a lot of power, which is why we've got a small fusion reactor on board. Actually, no, I think it's a fission reactor. Actually, no, it's a fission reactor. Means it can last for quite a long time. These corvettes can go out and they can stay unsupplied for a pretty long period of time. But yeah, as you see, flying through debris, truly beautiful. And now what we have to do is get ourselves into orbit around Dreidos, and we have the rebel scum trapped on the surface. And now it's time to bring up the Spirit of Dreidos. As you see, we're using our in-system fusion torches. There's 4 big Kerbstein drives. No. Only using those for Interplanetary. So the way Interplanetary transport works in this series is you have to be right on the edge of the gravity well, right on the edge of the sphere of influence of the planet, and then you can use your Kerbsteins to take a pretty much direct trajectory towards another planet. They're so absurdly efficient that you can stay at pretty much 0.3 of a G consistently for days, months at a time. So that's what we're going to use to allow interplanetary travel to happen very quickly. And the limit we have on movement in this series is you can jump to the nearest planet in a higher orbit or the nearest planet in a lower orbit. There is a bit of leeway with this, but that's the basic movement system we've got. And once you've colonized the system, you can move within colonized territory freely within your turn. So I could move, say I colonized half the solar system, I could move from one side to the other, but as soon as I'd have to jump to a system I hadn't colonized, then it would use that would take my entire turn to move there. That's just a way of limiting movement within a turn, so you can't fly halfway across the solar system in one turn and colonize or attack like one of your enemy's outer colonies or something. That would be silly. So just a very simple movement system to prevent that from happening. But now we have got the Spirit of Dreidos into orbit around Dreidos, we can deploy our Mercury class dropship. Freudian slip. Anyway, as you see, just very gently easing it out the hangar. We don't want to activate those thermal ramjets while we're inside the ship. That would be pretty stupid. So we make sure we clear the hangar bay and then we activate them. One of them is actually on the wrong propellant, still trying to use intake atmosphere, so we have to change it up to use liquid fuel, and there we go. Even though we are now using fuel, it's still a very, very efficient way of using it. Now, if we were landing on a body with significant gravity or a body with an atmosphere, we would actually go and land with the dropship and then deploy our rovers. But since Dreidos has got such weak gravity, landing and then driving the rovers would be nigh impossible. The gravity isn't high enough for you to actually drive properly along the surface. So what we're doing is we're just deploying our 3 Haley class rovers. They have small engines and a bit of fuel, and we're just going to let them guide themselves down to the surface. We're taking a very, very aggressive approach here. We're essentially going to come down straight on top of the mining installation. Whether or not this is going to go well, well, you'll see, won't you? But yeah, note to self for the future: don't directly attack a mining installation covered in anti-aircraft guns from the air. I mean, do they still count as anti-aircraft guns if you're on an airless body? I guess so. I guess they're anti-spacecraft guns, but these are flying rovers. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of unorthodox tactics in this series. Throw Fall of Kerbin out the window with atmospheric fighters and strategic bombers and just bog standard tactics and tanks and ships. No, you're going to see flying rovers, floating I was going to say floating ships, but that's quite normal. Floating planes, spacecraft attacking bases on the surface. It's going to be pretty damn awesome. If you read the rules in the description, you might get a taste of what we have to come. However, we are closing on the mining installation now. As you see, we've opened up with our weapons, but at this range, yeah, our weapons aren't doing a huge amount of damage, and they're still pretty inaccurate. We're using some pretty powerful, but once again pretty inaccurate 30mm chain guns. They're not as heavy duty as the spacecraft grade ones we used on the Pluto class, which means they've got a much faster rate of fire, but yeah, at this kind of range you're not really going to get many consecutive hits. The first few minutes of the engagement go pretty uneventful, to be fair. I'm just sort of struggling to control 3 rovers. We fly straight over the base without taking much fire ourselves. However, once I start trying to control multiple rovers, that's when things start getting a little bit more complicated. I think what happens here is I swap back to the rover to have a look at our assaults here. That's going. We're getting a pretty decent assault here. We're getting a few good hits on the 4 craft that are landed here. We've got 2 half tracks with 30mm phalanx cannons, so very good point defense weapons, and then we've got 2 with 30mm chain guns, very accurate long range weapons, which did chew us up quite a bit while we were making our approach. I think what happens is one of those phalanx cannons hits that rover and sends it spiraling towards the surface, because it was not traveling that fast towards the surface when I left it, and yeah, it plummets into the surface of Dreidos. So yeah, not a great start. Our first rover's been lost just to pure negligence, because controlling 3 at once is surprisingly quite difficult. And while we're trying to control our second rover, the first one gets ripped to shreds by one of the phalanx cannons, and now they're starting to open up on our third rover. And as you can see, yeah, we're not doing a great job at crushing this miniature uprising, are we? We're not a very good evil empire. Yeah, we should have got some massive walkers, something like that. But yeah, we're quite a poor evil empire. We don't have the resources to do massive frontal assaults yet. We're just doing small, pathetic frontal assaults that get chewed up very easily. As you see, we're pulling some pretty crazy evasive maneuvers to try and dodge the incoming fire. We're doing a pretty decent job, but we are getting glanced now and then. We really do now need to get down to the surface, because this type of attack strategy, it's just not going to work. We've got 4 vehicles to take out, and we've only got 1 rover left, and just floating around in the sky, you see we're taking a pretty fearsome beating. Thankfully, this rover has got 100mm of armour all around it, so it's pretty tough. It can take a few hits. If it didn't, I think we would have been cut in half by that volley there. But thankfully, we can get down to the surface, we can get out of their arcs of fire, and then we have the engagement on our terms. I think those craft were designed around stopping us getting to the surface in the first place. I think they were probably designed around us going for a full frontal assault. Maybe they anticipated us being pretty aggressive like that. We land pretty hard, but the rover is still perfectly intact, just missing a bit at the rear. So now we're on the ground. We have much heavier duty weapons than those vessels there. I think 2 of them, the vehicles which aren't the half tracks, they have pretty decent armour, but they have chain guns, which are good for anti-aircraft duties, but yeah, they're not particularly good in a dedicated ground engagement. As you see, we take a few hits from the phalanx cannon, but after we open up with our 30mm chain gun, we completely obliterate the unarmoured half-track, and as you can see, pieces of it fly off. Not quite into orbit, but certainly up quite a way in the low gravity. We're struggling to turn the brakes on, skidding all over the surface. I think it's something like 0.05 of a G on this moon, something like that. We managed to get the jump on the second half track, opening up with our 30mm while using the biodome for cover. I don't think even they'll be crazy enough to risk firing upon the biodome. If you pierce that glass, then all of your comrades on the mining installation are going to suffocate and die. So yeah, I think they're probably being quite careful with their fire. Saying that, if they wanted us to not shoot it, maybe they shouldn't have put their tanks right on top of it, right in the line of fire. Now, the chain guns don't have a 360 degree of traverse, so I didn't realise this, but we sneak up behind them and we get the jump on them. They can't fire at us, so all we do is open up with our 30mm here and we just obliterate them. There's nothing that they can do. Even if they could turn around, that chain gun, I don't think it would do too much, even to our light armour. These things are quite heavily armoured, so it takes a lot of rounds to get through theirs. But sure enough, after pumping round after round after round into them, yeah, they succumb to our volley of fire. The first one goes down, and we begin firing upon the second one. Not entirely fair on them, I guess, that they weren't facing the right way, but you know, that's just the problem with using these chain guns. They don't have a full degree of traverse, so you really need to be using more than one if you want to cover all the possible avenues of attack. They did do quite a decent amount of damage to our rovers while we were on approach, but nothing particularly significant. We are using the new version of Beardy Armory, in which everything gets allocated hit points and everything can be given armor, so it's a much better damage model, which allows things to take a few hits and actually allows for a much better and more sophisticated armor system as well. But there we go, we have crushed the rebel uprising on our moon of Dreidos, and now the materials from the mining installation will continue flowing into our war machine next episode. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. We could launch some spacecraft now, 5 points worth from our home world. However, there's nothing really worth building that costs 5 points. This corvette, as you see here, costs 7 points, and I would very much like to build more of those and less series class skiffs, which are really quite useless. So we will be saving those 5 points for the next episode. Keep an eye out for Tape's episode. It should be going up tomorrow or Monday, where he will be dealing with a bit of a crisis of his own before we both go interplanetary in the second episode. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I will see you all next time.